I used to think the scariest part of driving rideshare was the drunks, the ones who got loud, the ones who threw up, the ones who cried and begged you not to leave them. That stuff is messy, but it's simple. You can see it coming. What happened to me that night was different, because nothing about her felt out of control. That was the problem. It was close to midnight when I picked her up. I remember the time because I'd just told myself, 2 more rides, then I'm done. I was doing that thing drivers do, chasing the last little burst of money before the fatigue starts making your decisions for you. The kind of tired where every red light feels personal. The kind of tired where you start hoping for short rides and quiet passengers. Her pickup was in a normal spot. A side street in a mixed neighbourhood, small houses, a few duplexes, some parked cars half buried in old leaves. Not wealthy, not dangerous, just regular. She was already outside when I pulled up. No running, no waving, no frantic energy. She stood near the curb with her hands in her coat pockets, like she'd been waiting for a bus. When she opened the back door, she did it carefully, like she didn't want to slam it. She got in and sat directly behind the passenger seat, not behind me. That was the first detail that stuck. People who sit behind the driver, especially at night, always make you notice. Even if they're harmless, the position is wrong in a way your body understands. She didn't choose that spot. She chose the safest seat in the car. And still, I felt my shoulders tighten. I glanced up at the rearview mirror. She didn't look back. She was staring out the window, calm, face relaxed, like the ride was already over in her mind. I did my usual. "Hey, how's it going?" I said, light, professional. "Hi," she said. One word, soft voice, no emotion, not rude, not warm, just a reply. Her name on the app was something plain, the kind of name you see and forget immediately. She had a small bag in her lap. Could have been a purse, could have been a tote. Nothing big enough to carry a life in, if that matters. I started driving. The destination was about 15 minutes away, on the other side of town. At first, everything was normal. The streets were wet and glossy under streetlights. Patches of fog hung low near the river. The radio was on low volume, just enough to fill space without demanding attention. And she was quiet. Not the quiet of someone angry. Not the quiet of someone trying to make you uncomfortable. Just quiet, like she didn't need to perform for anyone. A few minutes in, I caught her eyes in the mirror. Not on me, on the mirror itself, like she was watching my reflection. I looked back to the road immediately. I told myself not to be weird about it. People check mirrors. People look around. People are tired. Still, every time I checked the rear view, she seemed to be watching something. Not the passing cars, not the houses. Me, or maybe the outline of me. The ride stayed uneventful. She didn't ask to change the temperature. Didn't ask about my night. Didn't mess with the window. Didn't scroll on her phone. She sat still. And the longer she sat still, the more I started noticing all the small sounds you hear when there's no conversation to blur them. The hum of the tyres, the click of my turn signal, the faint rattle of something in my centre console, my own breathing when I forgot to keep it steady. At a stoplight, I glanced at the GPS on my dash. Then, without looking down, she said quietly, "Left here." It wasn't a question. It wasn't a suggestion. It was instruction. I blinked and checked the screen. The GPS did want me to go left. I turned. I told myself it was coincidence. People recognise their own neighbourhoods. She might have taken the route 100 times. 2 minutes later, she did it again. Right. Again, the GPS agreed. I felt a small cold place open in my chest. Not fear, not yet. Just awareness. like noticing a stranger walking behind you, matching every turn. I didn't speak, I just drove. The destination was a small apartment complex, nothing fancy, a cluster of buildings with dim parking lot lights, and a narrow drive. I pulled up where the app pinned the drop-off. I put the car in park. The ride ended on the screen. I did my normal closing line, the one I'd said 1,000 times. "All right, you're all set," I said. For a second, nothing happened. She didn't move. No seatbelt click, no door handle, no shift in weight. I looked in the mirror again. She was staring forwards now, past the headrest, like she was looking through the windshield into the dark lot. I waited a beat, letting the social cue do its work. Most passengers snap out of whatever mental place they're in and leave. She didn't. I cleared my throat gently. "Hey," I said, "we're here." Her eyes moved slightly, like she'd heard me from far away. "I know," she said. Still no movement. My hand stayed on the wheel. I kept my voice calm, like calm could control the situation. "Okay," I said, "this is your stop." She took a slow breath. Then in the same calm tone she said, "I'm not getting out." It didn't land at first. It sounded too simple, too normal. Like she'd said I forgot something. I let out a small laugh I didn't mean to. Okay," I said. "Did the app put the wrong address? I'm not getting out," she repeated. Same tone, same volume, no anger, no pleading, just a statement. I stared forward at the empty lot. It was quiet outside, no one walking, no lights in the windows that I could see. The kind of quiet that makes you suddenly aware you're sitting in a sealed box of glass. I tried again. "I'm sorry," I said, keeping it polite, "but I need you to exit the vehicle." She turned her head slightly toward me, and I saw her face more clearly in the mirror. She didn't look distressed. She didn't look high. She didn't look like someone in the middle of a breakdown. She looked composed, almost gentle. "I have nowhere else to go," she said. I swallowed. It wasn't unheard of. People kicked out of houses, people stranded, people trying to guilt you into another trip. It happens. But then she added very quietly, "Nowhere else to go but with you." That sentence sat in the air like a smell. I felt my heartbeat change, not faster, stranger, like my body was trying to decide what category to put her in. I forced a breath in through my nose. "Listen," I said, "I don't know what you're dealing with, but you can't stay in my car." She nodded once, like she agreed with me, like we were having a normal conversation. "I know," she said, and then she didn't move. My mind started throwing out options. Option 1, get out of the car and open her door from the outside. But that meant turning my back, stepping into a dark lot with her still behind me. Option 2, drive to a police station, but she was refusing to leave. Driving her somewhere else could turn into something that looked bad for me. Option 3, call the platform support line, but support lines are for refunds and lost phones, not this. So I did what most people do when something goes wrong in public. I tried to solve it with words. "Okay," I said. "What's going on? Are you hurt? Are you in danger?" She blinked slowly. "No," she said. "Are you homeless?" I asked, and I hated how blunt it sounded. She didn't react. "No," she said again. "Then why are you saying you have nowhere else to go?" She looked down at her hands in her lap. When she spoke, her voice was still calm. "Because you're safe," she said. My stomach tightened. "You don't know me," I said, trying to keep it neutral. She lifted her eyes to the mirror. "Yes, I do," she said. A pause. Then, like she was reading off a form, she said my full name. Not my first name, not the shortened version on the app. My full name. First, middle, last. My fingers went numb on the steering wheel. I stared straight ahead like, if I didn't move, this would become a dream and slide off me. How do you... I started. Then she kept going. She said my address. Not just the street, the unit number, the city, the zip code. Perfectly. Like she'd lived there. Like she'd received mail there. For a second the inside of the car felt too small. Like the windows were closing in. I tried to speak and my mouth didn't work right away. That's not, I said, and it came out weak. That's not funny? She nodded again, slow. I know, she said. I looked down at my phone in the centre console where the ride app was still open. Her profile picture was the standard silhouette. No details, no warning. I felt anger spark, hot and fast, because fear often turns into anger when it needs somewhere to go. How did you get that? I asked. She didn't answer the question. Instead, she said, I can't go back to where I came from. Her voice softened just a fraction. I need to stay with you. I shook my head once, not as a gesture to her, but to keep myself from spiralling. No, I said, you need to get out of my car. She sat still and then she said, if I get out, you'll drive away. It wasn't accusatory, it wasn't dramatic, it was the simplest fact. Yes, I said, and my voice cracked on the word. She looked down again. That's what everyone does, she said. Something in the way she said it, not sad, not angry, just certain, made my skin prickle. I thought about the address she'd spoken. I thought about my front door, my mailbox, the way my apartment hallway echoed at night, and then I realised I'd been sitting here too long. If she was going to do something, the longer I stayed parked, the more control she had. I picked up my phone with a hand that didn't feel like mine. I'm going to call the police, I said. She didn't flinch. She didn't beg. She didn't threaten. She just said, okay. That okay was worse than yelling would have been. I dialed. I kept my voice low, even though there was no one nearby to overhear. Like volume could change the shape of the situation. I gave my location, told them I was a rideshare driver, and a passenger was refusing to exit. I didn't say the address thing yet. I didn't want to sound crazy. I didn't want the dispatcher to hear fear and decide I was exaggerating. The operator told me to stay put and keep myself safe. Officers were on the way. I hung up. The car felt louder after the call, like the silence had been disturbed. I stared at the windshield, watching my breath fog and clear. She shifted slightly in the back seat for the first time, just enough to make my muscles tense. Then she said, casually, they're going to ask if I'm okay. I didn't respond. She continued, still calm. They'll ask if you touched me, she said. My throat went tight. They'll ask if I feel threatened, she said. I turned my head just a little, enough to see her from the corner of my eye. She was looking out the window again, not at me, like she was talking about the weather. I swallowed and forced the words out. Why are you doing this? She took a breath. I'm tired, she said. That was it. Just tired. Then after a pause she added, and you're the kind of person who doesn't leave people. I felt something cold crawl under my ribs, because she wasn't entirely wrong. I'm not a hero, I'm not some saint, but I do have that problem. Staying on the phone with a friend too long, giving someone a ride when I should say no, letting guilt drive. I hate that she saw it, or guessed it, or whatever she did. In the distance, blue and red lights flashed against falling mist. The police car rolled into the complex, tyres crunching. The relief I expected didn't come. Instead, my stomach dropped, because now it wasn't just her and me. Now it was a scene. 2 officers got out. One approached my window. The other lingered back, watching the car like it might suddenly grow teeth. I rolled my window down a crack. The cold air rushed in. Evening, the officer said. His voice was calm, practiced. "You the caller?" "Yes," I said. "She won't get out." He glanced at the back seat. "Mum?" She leaned forward slightly so he could see her. "Yes," she said, polite. "You okay?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "I'm okay." He looked back at me. "What's going on?" I tried to keep my voice steady. "She refuses to exit," I said. "The ride's over." The officer nodded slowly, then addressed her again. "Ma'am, the ride is complete. You'll need to exit the vehicle." She unbuckled her seatbelt with a soft click. And for a second I thought, "Oh, okay, it's over." Then she looked at me in the mirror. Not at the officer, at me. And she said softly, "Don't go home right away." My blood ran cold. The officer didn't react. He might not have heard her, or he heard it and didn't understand it. She opened the door and stepped out into the cold like it was nothing. No struggle, no argument, no tears, just compliance. The second officer guided her a few steps away and spoke to her quietly. I couldn't hear what they said. The first officer leaned in closer to my window. "Has she threatened you?" he asked. I hesitated, because this was the moment where I could say the truth. She knows my full name and my address. But the truth sounded insane. It sounded like paranoia. It sounded like something that would turn the focus onto me. So I said something safer. "She just won't leave," I said. "And she said some personal information." The officer's face tightened slightly. "What kind of personal information?" I swallowed. "My name," I said. "My full name." He studied me. Then he glanced over at her again. "She say anything else?" he asked. I felt my tongue stick to the roof of my mouth. I should have said it. I should have said the address. But the fear of not being believed, the fear of looking like I was exaggerating, won. I shook my head. "Just weird stuff," I said. He nodded, like he'd heard weird stuff 1,000 times. "Okay," he said. "You're free to go?" I watched them talk to her. She stood with her hands in her coat pockets, posture relaxed, head tilted, like she was listening to instructions at a store checkout. Then she nodded once. One of the officers gestured toward the building. She walked that direction, slow, unhurried, no urgency, no shame, no confusion. She didn't look back. The officer at my window said, "Drive safe," and stepped away. I pulled out of the lot on shaking legs. I didn't go home, not right away. I drove for a long time, taking random turns, staying on main roads, circling brightly lit gas stations. I parked in a grocery store lot that was empty and sat there with my hands on the wheel, staring at my own reflection in the windshield. I kept replaying the moment she said my address, unit number, zip code. Perfect. I checked the ride app history. Her trip still showed up. Normal receipt, normal payment, normal little map line from pickup to drop off. Nothing to explain how she knew what she knew. When I finally went home, the sun was starting to lighten the sky. I parked far from my building and walked the long way around, scanning for anyone sitting in a car, anyone standing too still. My hallway smelled the same as always. Carpet cleaner and stale air. Someone's cooking from a lower unit. My door looked untouched, and no scratches, no marks, no sign anyone had been there. Inside, everything was normal, and that was the worst part, because it meant what happened couldn't be blamed on a break-in or a clear, explainable threat. It was just a person, a calm woman, sitting in my back seat, refusing to leave, saying my name like she'd known me a long time. I stopped driving rideshare at night after that, not because I thought every passenger was dangerous, because I realised how much of that job depends on an invisible agreement. You pick someone up. You take them where they asked. They leave. Simple. Clean. But if someone decides not to follow that agreement, if someone decides to just sit there and make you the only option, you find out how thin your control really is. And sometimes late at night, when I hear a car door shut outside my apartment, I still think of her voice, soft, certain, like she was reminding me of something I'd forgotten. I need to be clear about something before I tell this. This didn't happen to me, but it was told to me by someone close enough that I know the shape of his house, the sound of his voice when he's lying awake at night, the way he pauses when he's remembering something he wishes he could forget. He didn't just summarize it, he walked me through it, day by day, moment by moment. By the end, it felt like something I'd lived. At the time, my life was ordinary. That's not me downplaying it, that's the truth. I was married, 2 kids, a house in a neighbourhood where the biggest drama was someone parking too close to a mailbox. I worked a steady job. Same building, same desk, same routine. I liked routine. Routine meant nothing surprised you. At work, I wasn't important. I wasn't public-facing. I wasn't leadership. My name wasn't on any company page. If you didn't work on my floor, you wouldn't know who I was. I kept my personal life separate. No family photos on my desk. No oversharing. No social media posts about work. Which is why she shouldn't have noticed me at all. She started on a Monday. New hire, new badge, new smile at the morning meeting. She was introduced like everyone else. Name, role, polite applause. She made eye contact when people spoke, took notes, nodded in the right places. Nothing about her stood out. That's important too. She didn't dress strangely, didn't linger, didn't stare, didn't attach herself to anyone. She ended up working near me, not reporting to me, not under me, just close. Close enough to hear conversations, close enough to notice patterns. The first couple of weeks were uneventful. She learned quickly, faster than most new hires. She didn't ask the kinds of questions people usually ask when they're still figuring things out. It was like she already knew how things worked and was just confirming it. I noticed, but I didn't think much of it. Then she started knowing things, small things at first. She knew which days I left early, knew which days I stayed late. Once she handed me a document and said, "You'll want this before your meeting." I hadn't told anyone about the meeting. I laughed it off. People talk. Calendars overlap. Offices are porous places. Still, I remember the moment sticking with me longer than it should have. Another time, she asked if I wanted cream in my coffee. I hadn't ordered coffee. I hadn't mentioned it. But she was right. I did. She knew I didn't eat cake in the break room because of my kids' allergies. I hadn't told her that either. She mentioned my wife's name once, casually, like it was common knowledge. I assumed gossip. Someone overheard something. Maybe I'd said it once without thinking. That's how it starts. You explain it away because the alternative feels dramatic. Then one afternoon, we were alone in the copy room. Not trapped, not awkward, just quiet. She watched the machine whir, then looked at me and said, very casually, "I applied here because of you." I laughed. It sounded like a joke, a strange one, but still a joke. "What do you mean?" I asked. She shrugged. "I wanted to work near you." There was no flirtation in it, no smile that lingered, no nervous energy, just a statement, like she was telling me the weather. I felt something shift in my chest. Not fear yet, just awareness. I joked it away, made an excuse, went back to my desk. But later that day I checked with HR. Not officially, casually. The kind of question you ask while pretending it's curiosity. They pulled up her application. She'd applied months before my name was ever associated with that department. Before my role was public internally, before anyone outside a small circle would have known I worked there, HR didn't see a problem. I did. After that, the comments changed. She didn't just know names, she knew details. She asked how my wife was recovering from surgery. I hadn't mentioned the surgery at work. She asked if my youngest was excited about starting school. She mentioned my kids' birthday parties, not recent ones, old ones, themes, locations, things you only remember if you were there, or if someone described them in detail. Once she laughed and said, "Your backyard always turns into mud when it rains." I remember staring at her, because my backyard does turn into mud when it rains, and I had never talked about my backyard at work. I started noticing how often she knew when I wasn't there. She knew when I was sick before I called out, knew when I took a day off, knew when I left early for a school event. At home, I started feeling it too. I checked the windows more often, listened when a car slowed near the house. I didn't tell my wife everything at first, just vague comments. "Work's been weird. There's this new person." I didn't want to sound paranoid, but I started changing routines, parking in different spots, leaving at different times, taking different routes home. I told myself it was nothing, until I asked her directly. We were alone again, open space, plenty of people nearby. I asked her how she knew so much about my life. She didn't deny it. That's the part that still bothers me. She smiled gently and said, "You talk more than you think." No explanation, no apology, no concern. Just that. She didn't last long after that. Transferred. Moved on. HR never gave details. Nothing dramatic happened. No confrontation, no threat, no crime. And that's what makes it hard to explain. Because the fear wasn't loud, it was quiet. It was the feeling of being known without permission, of realizing that someone had been present in your life without ever being invited. I still think about the timing, how she applied before my name was public, how she chose to work near me, not with me, how she never needed access. She already had everything she wanted, and that's the part that stayed with him, and with me, because some people don't need to break into your life. They just stand close enough to memorize it. I found the first note on a Tuesday. I remember the day because Tuesdays are the kind of day you don't notice unless something changes it. I came home from work with that familiar end-of-day heaviness. Keys in my hand, shoulders tight, brain still stuck in emails and fluorescent lighting. My building was quiet. It always was. A small place, older. Narrow hallways, thin carpet that never really looked clean, no matter how often they vacuumed. The kind of apartment building where you might see a neighbour once a week and still not know their name. My door was at the end of the hall, and when I got there, I saw it. A sticky note pressed right above the peephole, like someone wanted to make sure I couldn't miss it. Bright yellow, neat handwriting. It said, "Hey, great talking earlier. I'm so glad you're settling in. If you need anything, just knock." I stood there for a second, keys hovering near the lock, because I hadn't talked to anyone. Not earlier, not at all. I'd gone to work before the sun was fully up. I'd come home after dark. I hadn't stopped in the lobby. I hadn't run into anyone in the hall. I peeled the note off and held it closer like the words might rearrange. They didn't. I looked up and down the hallway. No footsteps, no doors opening, no muffled TV noise, just quiet. My first thought was simple. Wrong door. That's what notes are usually. Misplaced packages, confused delivery drivers, someone in 3B leaving a message for 3A and not noticing. So I unlocked the door, went inside, and tossed the note on the kitchen counter without thinking too much about it. I wish that's where it ended. I didn't live the kind of life that invites mystery. That's the thing. I wasn't in a dramatic situation. I wasn't fighting with a partner. I wasn't going through something that would make me paranoid. I was just living. Work, home, repeat. And my building matched that. Quiet. Anonymous. A place where people existed near each other without intersecting. Which is why the second note bothered me more. It showed up 3 days later. Thursday. This one wasn't above the peephole. It was lower, right at eye level, taped neatly to the centre of my door. Same handwriting, same cheerful tone. It said, "Forgot to tell you. Your laugh made my day. I needed that. See you later." I didn't laugh at home, not out loud, not the way that would carry through walls. I stood in the hallway reading it twice, feeling a slow, uncomfortable heat rise in my chest. Because it wasn't just wrong door confusion anymore. It was specific. It was written to someone who had interacted, someone who had a shared moment, someone she believed was me. I knocked on the door across the hall. No answer. I knocked on the one beside it. No answer. I listened to my own breathing in the hallway and felt stupid, standing there like I was trying to chase a ghost with a sticky note. So I went inside again, locked the door behind me, and this time I didn't just toss the note away, I placed it on the counter next to the first one. Like I was starting a file, like I was building proof. For the next week nothing happened, no notes, no weird run-ins, and I started to relax, the way your mind does when it wants things to be normal again. I told myself it was a misunderstanding. Maybe someone had talked to me and I forgot. Maybe I'd had a passing exchange in the hallway and my brain didn't tag it as memorable. People are tired, people blur, then the notes came back. And they came more often, one on Monday, one on Wednesday, then another on Friday, always when I wasn't home. Always cleanly placed, like she had time and wasn't worried about being seen. The messages stayed friendly, almost sweet, but the familiarity deepened. Hope your meeting went okay today. Sorry your stomach was bothering you earlier. Try ginger tea. That shirt looks better on you than you think. Little things, little exact things. I stared at that last one for a long time. Because I had worn a shirt that morning and spent 10 seconds in the mirror thinking it made me look older than I felt. No one at work mentioned it, no one would, but she did, on a note left on my door while I was gone. That's when it stopped feeling like a harmless mix-up and started feeling like someone had been paying attention. A lot of attention. I told myself not to spiral. So I did what people do when they want control. I responded. I grabbed a pen, a sticky note of my own, and I wrote, "Hi, sorry, I think you might have the wrong apartment. I don't think we've met. I'm in my unit." Polite, clear, harmless. I stuck it right in the centre of the door. Then I went to work the next day with a weird tightness in my stomach, like I'd left something vulnerable out in the open. When I came home, my note was gone. And there was a new one. Same handwriting, same bright yellow. It said, "Oh, you're cute. We don't have to pretend." I stood there, keys shaking slightly between my fingers. Because she hadn't corrected anything. She hadn't said, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry, wrong door." She hadn't acknowledged the possibility that she didn't know me. Instead, she told me, gently, playfully, that I was pretending. Like she knew the truth better than I did. I took the note down and went inside, locked the door. Then, without really thinking, I checked my locks twice. Deadbolt, chain, handle. Everything secure, nothing forced, nothing tampered with. And yet, sitting alone in my living room, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been close. Over the next 2 weeks, the notes got worse in the quietest way. Not threatening, not violent, just intimate. They started referencing things I did inside my apartment. Not big things, not dramatic things, small private things. Sorry about the phone call with your mum. I could tell it drained you. I like when you pace while you think. It's endearing. Your living room looks better with the lamp on, less lonely. That last one made my throat tighten, because my living room was lonely. And I did turn the lamp on for that reason. Not because I needed light, because I couldn't stand the shape of the room in the dark. And she knew. At that point, I stopped leaving my blinds open. I started checking the peephole before I left. I started listening in the hall before I unlocked the door. Every day, I found myself scanning the building in little ways. Laundry room, stairwell, parking lot. Faces that I'd ignored before suddenly became candidates. An older man carrying groceries. A young couple I'd seen once. A teenager with headphones. Anyone could have been the one leaving notes. Or it could have been someone I'd never noticed at all. That thought was the worst, because it implied she could move through the building without leaving an impression. Like she'd practiced being invisible. I called the building manager. I kept my voice calm. I explained that someone was leaving notes on my door and referencing personal things. He sounded annoyed in that polite landlord way. Maybe someone's just being friendly, he said. They're not, I told him. He sighed. Do you know who it is? No, I said, that's the point. Well, he said, if it escalates, call the police. I almost laughed. Because what was I supposed to say to the police? Officer, my neighbour is being too familiar. Nothing has been stolen. No one had broken in. No one had physically confronted me. I had sticky notes. That's what I had. So I did what people do when they are not being taken seriously. I tried to gather more proof. I bought a cheap little door camera. Not fancy, one of those simple ones you stick up and connect to your phone. I installed it on a Saturday morning. I angled it directly at my door, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something like relief, because now, if she came by, I'd see her. I'd have a face, a name, a real person to attach to the handwriting. That night, I slept deeper than I had in a while. When I woke up the next morning and checked the camera feed, there was nothing, no motion alerts, no footage, no battery drain, just empty time. I checked the camera itself. It was still there, light blinking, connected, working. It was as if she hadn't come at all. But when I opened my door to grab the newspaper, I didn't read. There was a note, right above the peephole, bright yellow, neat handwriting. It said, "Good try, Sawahi." My stomach dropped so hard I had to grab the door frame to steady myself. I stared at it, then at the camera, then back at the note. That's when I understood something I hadn't wanted to admit. She wasn't guessing. She wasn't mixing me up with someone else. She was responding. To me, to my actions, to my attempts at protecting myself. And she knew exactly when I was gone. The first time I actually saw her was in the laundry room. It was a Wednesday night, late. The building was quieter then. I'd started doing laundry at odd hours, partly because I hated running into people, partly because I wanted fewer witnesses if something went wrong. I walked down the stairs with my basket and pushed into the laundry room. The fluorescent light buzzed. The air smelled like detergent and damp concrete. And she was there, sitting on the folding table like she belonged, legs crossed, hands resting in her lap. She looked Normal. That was the strangest part. Not old, not young, not striking, not dishevelled. Just a woman in a plain jacket, hair tied back, face calm. She smiled like she'd been waiting for me the way you wait for a friend at a cafe. "Hi," she said. I froze in the doorway, basket heavy in my arms. My heart thudded, slow and loud. I didn't speak right away because my brain was still catching up to the fact that she was real. Not a hand, not a note, a person. She tilted her head slightly, like my silence amused her. "You've been so busy," she said. My mouth finally worked. "Are you the one leaving notes on my door?" I asked. She blinked, still smiling. "Of course," she said, like it was obvious. I tightened my grip on the laundry basket. "Why?" I asked. She slid off the table and stepped closer, not fast, not aggressive, just closing distance like it was normal. "Because we live together," she said. The words didn't make sense at first. They sounded like the wrong sentence. I stared at her, trying to read her face for the punchline, the joke, the twist. There wasn't one. She kept going, voice calm, gentle. "I've been living with you for months," she said. I felt cold move across my skin. "No," I said automatically. "No, you haven't." She gave me a look that wasn't angry. It was patient, like she'd heard me deny it before. "Don't do that," she said softly. "You don't have to pretend with me." My throat went tight. I glanced at the door behind me, calculating distance. Exit. Stairs. The hallway. She noticed. She didn't react. She just watched. "You don't know me," I said. Her smile widened a fraction. "I know you," she said. And then she started listing things. My wife's name. My kids' names. The fact that my youngest hated crust on sandwiches. The fact that we'd had a birthday party last year where the cake collapsed because someone carried it wrong. Details that weren't just facts. Details that carried texture. Like she'd been there. Like she'd heard the laughter. Like she'd smelled the frosting. I stood in that laundry room and felt my sense of reality soften at the edges. Because there are things you accept as possible, even when they're creepy. Someone watching your door, someone reading your mail, someone overhearing you through a wall. But knowing my kid's sandwich crust preference, knowing a cake collapsed at a party, that wasn't overheard in a hallway. That was inside my life. I whispered, "How do you know that?" She didn't answer. She stepped a little closer and said, almost fondly, "You're always so surprised." I backed up without thinking, my shoulder bumping the door frame. Her eyes followed me, still calm, still friendly. It was like she wasn't trying to scare me, like she couldn't understand why I was scared. I forced words out, shaky but firm. "Stop leaving notes," I said. "Stay away from my door." Her smile faltered, not into anger, but into something like disappointment. "Why would I do that?" she asked. "This is our home." I left. I didn't even do my laundry. I walked up the stairs too fast, fumbled with my keys, slammed my door behind me, and locked every lock I had. Then I called my wife. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the phone. When she answered, I tried to keep my voice steady, but it came out wrong. "Are you home?" I asked. "No," she said. "Why?" I swallowed hard. "Don't come back yet," I said. "Just go somewhere public for a little while, please." There was a pause. "What's going on?" she asked. And that's when I realised how impossible it was to explain. "There's a woman in our building who says she's been living with us." How do you say that without sounding insane? So I said something weaker. "There's someone acting strange," I said. "I'll explain soon." I hung up and stared at my door, breathing too fast. The hallway outside was quiet. No footsteps, no knocks, nothing. And somehow that was worse than hearing her, because it meant she didn't need to rush. She wasn't afraid. She believed she belonged. The last note came 2 days later. I'd been staying with my wife's sister. I'd barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that calm smile. I went back to the apartment in the middle of the day with my wife on the phone, just to grab clothes and paperwork and make sure nothing was broken. The hall was empty. My door looked normal. No scratches, no forced entry, no obvious sign of anything, but above the peephole, there was a sticky note, bright yellow, neat handwriting. It said, "You can't move out of something you're already in." That was it. No smiley face, no friendliness, just a statement. I took it down, hand shaking, and held it until the paper warmed against my fingers. We moved a week later. Different building, different neighbourhood, new locks, new routines. The manager acted confused, said he didn't know who she was, claimed there was no tenant matching the description. The police took a report but treated it like a nuisance issue. No one could prove anything. No one could point to a crime, because it was just notes. And a woman who smiled in a laundry room and said something insane, like it was normal. But the damage was real. It changed how I live, how I listen, how I trust quiet buildings. Because there's something uniquely terrifying about a person who decides you're connected, and then behaves like the connection is mutual, like consent is optional, like your life is a space they can step into, just because they feel like they belong there. And even now, months later, whenever I come home and see something stuck to my door, my stomach drops before my eyes even focus. Because for a while, I lived in a place where someone else's handwriting knew my life better than my neighbours ever did. And I still don't know the worst part. I don't know if she was only watching, or if she'd been inside, because the most frightening thing about it all was how sure she sounded when she said she'd been living with me for months.